J. Micheal Springman is our guest for the next 40 minutes or so. Then I'm getting into Sarah Palin, chillingly on Fox News, saying she wants to declare war on Iran and attack them. These are quotes. And endorsing Rick Perry. I mean, if this is who's taking over the Tea Parties, look out. Then I'm going to get into massive internet censorship being announced by the White House, the UN, and others. We're now being censored more and more all over the world. That's coming up. But J. Micheal Springman worked for the U.S. government for 20 years with the Foreign Service and Consulate. He went public with the story of his involvement in the large-scale exposing a CIA operation that brought hundreds of people from the Middle East to the U.S., issuing them passports and being trained inside the U.S. Now, at the time, he just saw these people on watch lists. They were flagged. He said, I won't let them in. And he can recap and correct any little areas where I'm wrong. So it's been a year or so, a couple of years since I've actually interviewed him. And this was first in the Toronto Star and other papers when we talked to him back in 2002. And then later he talked to the CIA and State Department, and they said, no, it was part of a secret program bringing him into the U.S. It was a terror cover, and that was then in Newsweek, everywhere else, that C.I.A and others were trained at U.S. bases in the U.S. And so joining us is Micheal J. Springman, Esquire, the former chief of the visa section in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, an attorney with 20 years in the U.S. Foreign Service, 20-plus years. Good to have you on with us, Micheal Springman.
Hi, I'm Mike Springman. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the invitation to speak to your audience again.
Now, just recap, and we're going to break here in a few minutes, long segment coming up. Recap exactly what happened with some of the 9/11 hijackers that you tried to block from getting into the country, and what's currently happening today with the underwear bomber. We'll discuss that.
Okay. Strictly speaking, I didn't have problems with the folks who were part of the 9/11 attack. I had been in Jeddah between 1987 and 1989 at the C.I.A.'s Consulate, where I had people I would routinely reject for a visa to come to the United States because they could not prove they had any ties either to Saudi Arabia or their own country that were sufficiently strong to compel them to return once they had been to the United States and done whatever they were supposed to do. In most instances, they could not tell me what they were going to do in the United States or where they were going. They didn't have any substantive jobs. They tended to be clerks, people who worked in supermarkets as checkers and things like this. And I kept rejecting them. And the Consul General, who worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Paul Arvid Tveit, who was a CIA case officer assigned to the commercial section, and the guy who, Andy Weber, who worked in the consular section part-time, also worked for the agency, and they kept saying, these people need to go to the United States. We need to give them visas, and could not or would not tell me why. I routinely rejected them, and I was told, if you want to keep your job, you will give them a visa. It wasn't until I was out of the Foreign Service that I learned from Joe Trento and a couple of other people that what was really going on was these people were being recruited for the Afghan war against the Soviets, and they were being brought to the United States for training, or for rewards, or for debriefings, or whatever. And they went back to Afghanistan, skilled in how to blow things up and shoot things down. I think after some reflection and looking at the news over the last couple of years that these people formed a cadre of organizations and groups to destabilize any government the United States didn't particularly like. I think they're working in Iraq.
This is an Islamicist terror brigade, but to be specific, this is in the lead up in the few years right before 9/11, and I've seen the news reports, even in the Wall Street Journal, in the late 90s, of these sprawling terror training camps where they're training these people, and then they end up attacking us. Stay there. We'll be right back. Okay, to flesh all this out, he was the head of the visa section of the Jeddah, Saudi Arabia U.S. Embassy. He discovered after he got out of the Foreign Service that they were creating kind of this Islamic brigade to attack and destabilize any country they wanted. That's his words. Then it was the same Jeddah, Saudi Arabia embassy that gave the passports, or the visas, excuse me, to the 15 supposed 9/11 hijackers. Now, in your own words, Mr. Springman, walk through this and why it's so important.
When I was there in Jeddah between 1987 and 1989, there was this constant flow of people who wanted visas and could not explain why they were going to the United States and could not explain what was going to compel them to return to Jeddah or their own country when they were done. And I routinely blocked them, and I was pressured and pressured and pressured, and I raised hell. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests. I complained to the Bureau of Consular Affairs in Washington. I complained to the embassy in Riyadh, and basically was ignored. Then when I saw that 15 of the 19 alleged attackers flying airplanes into buildings in the United States had gotten their visas from Jeddah, which I think was reported in the Los Angeles Times, I started to raise hell again. I went to the F.B.I. and said, I know what was going on. This is how it was happening. This was a C.I.A. operation. Of some 20 Americans, only 3 that I knew of, including myself, worked for the Department of State. The rest worked for the CIA or the NSA, the National Security Agency. And it just went into a black hole. I talked to a career consular officer with a lot more time in the system than I had, and he told me that the CIA had done this before, and it looked like the Indians were back off the reservation, and he had thought that the people at State had reined them in and put them back on. Obviously not. The amazing thing was that this went on and went on and went on. I have been told by Celerina Castillo, a former Drug Enforcement Agency official, that it was routine for the CIA to put its people into a stack of applications for visas handled by travel agencies, which is what happened in Jeddah. They had changed to something called the Visa Express program, where the travel agencies would handle the paperwork for visa issuance, and they would be rubber stamped by the consular officer at Jeddah. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted at this. And the CIA simply ran the whole show. I had made a mistake in not keeping copies of all the visas I had denied. I had a folder with me and had left it there in Jeddah, and I learned later that it had been destroyed by person or persons unknown. I could never find out who did this. Journalists have asked me repeatedly, well, who were these people? We'd love to have seen those applications. And I'd say, sorry, I can't do it. And I never did know where they went once they went to the United States. That's something I've not been able to find out either.
Well, let's get down to brass tacks here. Mm-hmm. They use these Muslim brigades trained by our government. Brzezinski's now written 2 books saying that they created these groups. Al-Qaeda was the computer program name at the CIA and State Department, that they actually attacked the Russian puppets in Afghanistan to get the Russians to come in. That's now admitted history. It wasn't like we see in these movies about Charlie Wilson's War, where the U.S. got involved in 1983. It was 1979. And so all of this is going on. They then use the Muslim extremists to menace Iraq. Saddam gave speeches about how they worked for the U.S. I'm not saying Saddam was a good guy. They're now using these same Wahhabists to attack Iran. Bush in 2007 put out a White House directive admitting they were using 4 different groups, 3 of them Wahhabists, 1 of them Kurd, against the Iranians. So that's on record. They use some of these groups out of Albania against Kosovo and the Serbs. And then they let them into the U.S. to use them against their #1 enemy, the American people. The offshore military-industrial complex wants to put naked body scanners in and have the Patriot Act, and we get the internal Homeland Security, and we get the internal MIAC reports saying Homeland Security and Northcom are really for gun-owning conservatives, libertarians, and anti-war activists, just anybody. And so this whole now again, I'm not saying that. I'm not asking you specifically what you think about the statement I just made. That's clearly what this is. I mean, these guys are a foreign brigade, kind of like the Islamicist Foreign Legion that works for the big banks, and they were let in, and whatever happened, they were involved, and we were attacked. And then I get the secret Homeland Security documents, and day 1, it's all about the American people. And I have the Boston Globe. Ridge accused Bush White House of political use of terror alert system. I mean, Mr. Springman, well, I know you're just technically telling the facts, but what does this look like to you?
Well, it looks like either a coup or a planned coup, and it's basically it's a march towards dictatorship and a national security state. The government really needs to create a climate of fear in Washington and throughout the country. And for my friends tell me, educated, traveled friends, it's succeeding. They want to be secure. They want to be safe. They don't want to fly to foreign countries because who knows what will happen there. And it's just absolutely astonishing to me.
Oh, my God. So, again, in your own words, please flesh this out. As a well-respected 20-year State Department high level, you basically were concurring